Look up at the night sky tonight. Find the brightest thing you can see, after the sun and the moon. That glowing dot hanging low on the horizon is Venus, your neighbor, the closest planet to Earth, the second planet from the sun. And for hundreds of years, people looked at it and thought, maybe there's life there. Maybe there are oceans. Maybe it's just like us. Then we sent our machines, and Venus ate them alive. In the last 60 years, humanity has launched over 40 missions to Venus. Dozens failed before they even arrived. The ones that actually landed were destroyed within hours. And right now, in 2026, not a single spacecraft is operating on the surface of Venus, not one. Meanwhile, Mars has rovers driving around, taking selfies, drilling into rocks, and sending back postcards. So why has the closest planet to Earth been almost completely abandoned? The answer involves a Cold War, a graveyard of destroyed spacecraft, a planet that was once exactly like Earth, and a mystery in the clouds that scientists still cannot explain.
Let's start with what Venus actually is, because from a distance, it looks harmless. Venus is almost exactly the same size as Earth, almost the same mass, same rocky surface. It formed at roughly the same time, from the same materials, in the same solar system. For a long time, scientists genuinely believed it might be Earth's twin, just a little warmer, covered in tropical jungles or shallow oceans beneath those thick clouds. Science fiction writers loved Venus. It was the obvious first destination beyond our own world. But there was a problem. Nobody could see through the clouds. Venus is completely wrapped, every inch of it, in a thick, unbroken layer of cloud that reflects sunlight so perfectly that it becomes the brightest object in our sky apart from the sun and moon. What was underneath? For centuries, nobody knew. And in the late 1950s, as the space age began, two superpowers decided they were going to find out. Not because they were curious, but because they were competing.
It is 1961. The Cold War is at its most dangerous. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a race for supremacy, not just on Earth, but in space. Who gets to the moon first? Who launches the most satellites? Who explores the first planet? And Venus, being so close and so bright, becomes the target. Both sides begin launching probes, and almost immediately, something goes wrong. The Soviet Union made its first attempt in February 1961 with the launch of Sputnik 7, but it failed due to a fatal problem with the final stage of its rocket. They tried again 8 days later. The probe lost contact before it ever reached Venus. The Americans tried. Their rocket exploded on the launch pad. Another probe overshot Venus and drifted off into empty space forever. One Soviet probe, Cosmos 96, failed to leave Earth's orbit entirely and crashed back down near a small town in Pennsylvania, USA, instantly triggering speculation of a crashed UFO. Neither side could understand it. Venus was right there. It should be the easy one. But mission after mission, silence. The engineers went back to their drawing boards. They redesigned. They relaunched. Venus destroyed those two. Then, in 1967, the Soviets finally got one through. Venera 4 entered Venus's atmosphere and began transmitting data. Scientists in Moscow were ecstatic. Temperature readings, pressure readings, chemical composition. And then the numbers started coming in, and the celebration stopped dead. The surface temperature on Venus is around 467 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. The atmospheric pressure at the surface is 93 times what it is on Earth, roughly the pressure you would feel 900 meters underwater in the ocean. The clouds are made of sulfuric acid. The atmosphere itself is 96.5% carbon dioxide. If you stepped onto the surface of Venus without protection, you would be simultaneously crushed, cooked, and dissolved in under a minute. This was not a tropical paradise. This was, by any reasonable definition, hell. Venera 4 was destroyed before it even reached the surface. Venus had given them the data and then taken the machine as payment.
But the Soviets didn't stop. This was the Cold War. Stopping meant losing. They redesigned the probes to be tougher, heavier armor, better insulation, more reinforced structures. And in 1970, Venera 7 became the first spacecraft in human history to successfully soft land on another planet. It was transmitting data from the surface of Venus. Scientists were in tears. It was one of the greatest engineering achievements ever attempted. 23 minutes later, Venus destroyed it. They tried again. Venera 9 and 10, launched in 1975, became the first spacecraft to orbit Venus, and their landers sent back the first images ever returned from the surface of another planet. Rocky, broken terrain under a thick, glowing sky, alien and desolate. Scientists stared at those images for weeks. By 1982, Venera 13 sent back the first color photographs from the Venusian surface. Orange, cracked rock, a landscape that looked like the inside of a furnace. Beautiful in a terrifying way. And then, destroyed. The last spacecraft to successfully land on Venus was the Soviet Vega 2 mission in 1985, and it survived for just 52 minutes. After that, the Soviet Union itself began to collapse. Funding dried up. Engineers moved on. And with the end of the Cold War, the race to Venus ended too. The planet had outlasted the superpower that came closest to conquering it. Since 1985, no spacecraft has landed on Venus. Not one. In those same 40 years, we've sent rovers to Mars that have driven kilometers across the surface, drilled into rocks, tested soil samples, and operated for years. We have treated Mars like a scientific playground. Venus, the closer planet, the same-sized planet, the planet right next door, has been almost completely ignored. Why? Because the heat, the crushing pressure, and the corrosive acid atmosphere destroy some critical component of every lander within an hour or two. The longest any robot spacecraft has ever survived on the surface of Venus is 2 hours. After that, Venus destroys them. Every design that works perfectly in a lab on Earth gets annihilated on Venus. The electronics melt, the structure gets crushed, the acid eats through whatever is left. And the honest truth is, we still don't know how to build something that can survive longer. Even the most advanced spacesuits wouldn't be able to fully protect astronauts on the Venusian surface. A human being on Venus would last seconds. No suit, no vehicle, no technology we currently possess could keep a person alive down there. Venus is the one place in our solar system that we cannot yet touch.
But here is the part of the story that makes Venus truly extraordinary. Because Venus wasn't always like this. For much of its history, Venus likely had an Earth-like climate, with oceans, rain, perhaps even plate tectonics. Scientists studying the oldest rocks on Venus have found patterns in highland regions that look like ancient river valleys, carved by liquid water that no longer exists. For perhaps 2 billion years, Venus and Earth were two remarkably similar worlds, side by side in the solar system, both potentially capable of supporting life. Then something happened. Massive volcanic eruptions, on a scale that Earth has never experienced, pumped enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Temperatures began to rise. The oceans started to evaporate. More water vapor in the atmosphere trapped more heat. More heat meant more evaporation. The cycle fed itself, spiraled completely out of control, and never stopped. Less than 1 billion years ago, Venus's climate dramatically changed due to a runaway greenhouse effect, and transformed what may have been a habitable world into the hottest, most crushing surface in the solar system. Scientists call it a runaway greenhouse effect, and when they study it, they're not just studying Venus. They're trying to understand how the paths of Venus and Earth diverged, because the same process, triggered by the right conditions, could theoretically happen here too. Venus is not just a planet. It is a warning.
And then, in 2020, something happened that changed everything. Scientists analyzing Venus's upper atmosphere announced they had detected phosphine gas, about 50 kilometers above the surface, where temperatures and pressures are actually similar to Earth's. Phosphine is a chemical almost always associated with biological processes. It has no known geological source on Venus. For a brief moment, the entire scientific world stopped and asked the same question. Is there something alive in the clouds of Venus? The debate has never been fully resolved. Some scientists say the detection was a measurement error. Some say it requires more investigation. And some say, carefully and quietly, that we cannot rule it out. At around 50 kilometers above the surface, temperatures drop to between 30 and 70 degrees Celsius, and the air pressure becomes similar to Earth's at sea level. In theory, simple microbial life, the kind that survives in the most extreme environments on Earth, could exist in that layer of clouds. Not on the surface, not underground, but floating perpetually in the upper atmosphere of the most hostile planet in our solar system. Nobody has confirmed this. Nobody has disproved it either.
So what happens next? After 40 years of neglect, Venus is finally back on the agenda. NASA's Da Vinci mission will send both an orbiter and a descent probe to Venus. The probe will drop through the atmosphere, sampling its chemical composition all the way down, measuring temperature, pressure, and wind, and taking high-resolution photographs of the ancient highland terrain called Alpha Regio, which may be among the oldest surfaces on the planet. Da Vinci will be the first American spacecraft to explore Venus since the 1990s. NASA's Veritas mission will orbit Venus and map its surface in detail, answering whether Venus has Earth-like continents, active volcanoes, or plate tectonics. And the European Space Agency's Envision mission, slated to launch no earlier than 2031, will orbit Venus and study it from its surface all the way up through its atmosphere, the most detailed investigation of the planet ever attempted. India also has its own Venus mission, Shukrayan, in development, meaning that for the first time, multiple space agencies from multiple continents are simultaneously planning to study the same planet. But there is a complication. NASA's proposed budget cuts threaten both Da Vinci and Veritas, with the 2026 appropriations process leaving their futures uncertain. The decade of Venus, as scientists have called it, may happen with fewer missions than planned, or on a slower timeline. The planet that has always been hard to reach is now also hard to fund.
46 missions, dozens of failures, machines crushed and melted and dissolved within hours of landing. And yet every single one of them, even the ones that failed, taught us something we didn't know before. About the atmosphere, about the surface, about what happens when a planet goes wrong. Venus is not a planet we're afraid of. It's a planet that has earned our complete respect. It sits there every night, glowing in the sky, peaceful and bright, the most beautiful object in the sky, and holds secrets that have already destroyed dozens of our finest machines. It was once like Earth. It became hell. And somewhere in its clouds, 50 kilometers above a surface that will kill anything we send, there may be something alive, drifting in the acid, in the dark, in a world we still don't understand. We are going back, smarter this time, better equipped, with new spacecraft, new instruments, and new questions that the old missions never thought to ask. The planet that kills everything we send, and the one we cannot stop trying to understand.